Global War 36 enthusiast here, with a video about version 4.1 rule changes. So the first thing that HBG wanted to address is, this is my understanding about general percentages, but in 4.0, the Comintern were winning perhaps 25% of the time, and the Axis and Allies were splitting the other 75%. It's tricky to get the balance in a three-way game. You don't want to push too hard, so on the scale. So the Comintern were given some advantages as far as their strategic objectives. There were some changes made to their strategic objectives to try to gently increase the odds that they can win. So the first one is the CCP. They no longer have the spread the revolution strategic objective where they needed to take Siam, Annam Tonkin, and Cochin China. Now what they need to do is actually eliminate the KMT. And in playtesting, this has been fascinating to see. The fact that CCP wants to eradicate the KMT really makes it dangerous for the KMT to negotiate with the CCP, because they know that there's always the temptation to try to wipe them out. So as Morton put it, there's an attempt to increase hatred. So that's the first one. I think it's much more achievable. I think it's KMT. It's going to be very difficult to eradicate the KMT, and it should be. To get a strategic objective should be a difficult thing. But I think it's much more achievable than taking these territories down in Southeast Asia, because those could easily be, Comintern. CCP goes as the second phase of the turn. The Allies go afterwards. It would be very easy for them to just take one of those away. Whereas if CCP could eradicate KMT, that is locked down. A lot harder to take that back. Okay, so the next thing is that the Comintern got an advantage as far as propaganda war. If you remember, in version 4.0, there really isn't a bonus other than the income, the wartime income increase of propaganda war. Then there really wasn't an advantage to having all five, to possessing all five home country cities. I guess it's 6. I forgot about Novosibirsk. So if you possess all 6 of your home country territories now, you get a technology roll. And this is probably my favorite change in 4.1. Propaganda war gets renamed to rapid industrialization. And when you hold your 6 cities, then you get to make a technology roll. If you remember, USSR doesn't get to roll for technology until it reaches an income of 15. And so it might have been turn 6 at the best, or typically turn 7, when USSR could begin rolling for tech. But now, right from the start of the game, you get to choose one technology to roll for, and you have to make a difficult decision there. There's a lot of good options. For example, you could choose to roll for strategic rockets, the hardest tech for you to get that tech victory point. So if you start rolling for strategic rockets, that's going to dramatically increase the chance that you get that victory point. You could roll for advanced mechanized infantry, always a great unit. For USSR, advanced artillery is really tempting because you can get the Katushka rockets. And then improved factories is your route to get T-34s. So you can only roll for one tech, but that really helps USSR, and they can make some decisions early in the game about where to focus their tech rolls. And then I talked about this in the map, but over here, the strategic objective was moved here from the Kuril Islands over to South Sakhalin Island. So if you're trying to feed troops by the narrow crossing through Kamchatka, it's a much longer supply line than if you're trying to bring them in through North Sakhalin. So it brought that a little bit closer. Kind of makes more sense too that the Soviets would want South Sakhalin. If you just look at the territory, it's a lot, you know, a lot bigger hunk of land there. So that's what they have to take, and that's a tiny bit easier. An interesting change to the strategic objectives for the Comintern is the access to the Mediterranean bonus. That's where the Soviets want to capture Istanbul, and now if they do, they can use the factory movement special ability that they normally have to move around their factories inside of the Soviet Union. Now it expands to include the ability to move one minor factory outside home country each player turn. So you can use your strategic rail movement capacity to move a minor factory outside. Very interesting, and opens up a lot of strategic options for the Soviets. So that's the strategic objective changes. A change to what units may be purchased is for minor powers of CCP, Free France, and KMT. They are no longer able to purchase mountain infantry. So that's a big change in China, because mountain infantry was kind of the standard purchase that I had been seeing people make. And it just didn't make sense because, you know, mountain infantry are elite, and it didn't make sense for these minor powers to be producing kind of elite units. So now they can only build regular infantry, not mountain infantry. However, Free France is able to purchase foreign legions. So that's kind of a compensation for them, and that's now kind of a typical unit that you see them buying. When the French surrender, there's a slight change to how the Navy is allocated, the French Navy. The scuttle chance was increased by 1, and the chance of the naval unit going Vichy was reduced by 1. So a little smaller Vichy Navy, more ships being scuttled, 8% more ships being scuttled. But the Vichy now get to include Corsica in their recruitment role. So instead of just getting 1 for southern France, they'll have 1 or 2 if they hold those 2 for their recruitment. So 8% less ships, but 8% more land units, and the ship roll is only once, whereas the land unit is going to be every turn that Vichy exists. On technology, there was a change to improved logistics. Improved logistics was really like a high-risk, high-reward technology in version 4.0. You needed a 9 to develop it, but it would double your rail capacity. And of course, it has that ability to jump rail gauges. You can ignore rail gauge changes. Moving 8 units in Europe, strategic railing 8 units in Europe, I mean, that's a lot. So there was a change to improved logistics where it was actually reduced to only adding 1 strategic rail move. It still has the ability to ignore rail gauge change. It has +2 strategic naval movement, so that makes it more enticing for a country like USA, or maybe Great Britain. The +1 for the Soviets, you know, takes them from 2 in the Soviet Union up to 3. It's not as good as 4, of course, but it's close. But Europe goes from 4 to 5. So that it was lowered. I think more players are going to go for it now, actually, but it's not so preposterous in Europe. A change was made to the aircraft screening rules. Before, you could set up a single plane in, say, sea zone. You could put a plane on map. The British could put a plane on map in A23 and one on map in A22, and then prevent the Germans from getting into. If they also had a fighter in southern England, no aircraft could reach London. So there was a change where there's screening rules for aircraft. Now, if the British had, say, a bunch of ships and a fighter here, and the Germans brought in some fighters, they have to fight everything. They have to fight the fighter and all the naval units. You set up your screening force, and then you have whatever aircraft you want as your continuing force. But the aircraft that are continuing, they can move one space, and there's only a few things that they can do after they continue. They can carry out strategic bombing, they could do carpet bombing, or they could do a port attack. What they can't do is airborne assault. You can't do an airborne assault, so that's going to prevent the Germans from clearing the fighter, if there's a fighter on map here, and then bringing in a bunch of air transports and doing air assault on London. They can't come in and hit this port. Let's say there's some ships there. It could do a port attack, or it could strategic bomb the port to pin the ships in there, or it could do carpet bombing, but it cannot do the airborne assault with these new air screening rules. Another rule is that scrambling is not allowed into combat where the Japanese are doing their surprise attack. So if the Japanese are doing a surprise attack in Calcutta, normally what would happen is, if let's say that there were some ships here in this major port, the British could scramble into the Bay of Bengal because there's an amphibious assault here. Even if they didn't have a unit, if you remember, you can always scramble to an amphibious assault, whether you have a unit or not. But, well, I just said always. In this case, you cannot, because if the Japanese are doing their surprise attack on Calcutta, then there's no scrambling allowed there. So that's an interesting rule to make the Japanese surprise attack a little bit better. There's a very important rule that some players brought up about London. So if London fell, then the British would relocate their capital. And let's say they relocated it to Ottawa. Right now, we're in version 4.0 rules, there's nothing about that territory being home country. So you would have a major factory that wasn't in supply, that couldn't trace to home country. So there's a new rule that's been added in 4.1 that while your capital is relocated, the new location is automatically considered home country. There was a small change. SS Panzer Grenadiers have been renamed Panzer Grenadiers. And another change is that a minor factory located outside home country, like let's say the Soviets held Istanbul and had a minor factory here, in version 4.0, you had to trace to a major factory to be in supply, but now you just have to trace to home country to be in supply. So that's kind of that's the 90% of the changes. There's a lot of little edits, maybe reorganization, some sections, some rules were moved to different sections. But I think I've given you a good overview of the biggest changes to 4.1. From my perspective, the most important changes are to the Comintern strategic objectives. Hope you're watching Operation A View to a Kill, and you'll get to see 4.1 in action.